This will be a much deeper look at the movie overall. Of course, this is, as many of you know, the fifth Indiana Jones movie in the series, and the very last one, at the very least, to star Harrison Ford. And if there are future Indiana Jones movies that don't have Harrison Ford, I will probably still watch them. But I can safely say that this will be the final Harrison Ford as Indiana Jones movie review ever. This is it. And I am pretty confident that he is not going to return to do this role. So, its inception, as far as the first one in the movie series, was Raiders of the Lost Ark in 1981, June of 1981. So, it's been a long time. And I was 9 years old when I saw, I was 10 years old when I saw Raiders of the Lost Ark. So, for 42 years, I've been somewhat obsessed, a bit of a nerd about it, and then for a huge chunk of time, I would say through the 90s, I wasn't really looking at the movies all that much. Once in a blue moon, I would still think about it, but it wasn't as much as an obsession as it was in the 1980s. And many of you know, of course, that this fifth Indiana Jones movie I've been looking forward to. I've been talking about it on this channel for the last 10 years, so it's a good long time. And it seemed that Steven Spielberg years ago had cracked the story for a new Indiana Jones movie, and it seemed Shia LaBeouf was in fact going to return. At least there was an inkling of that happening. And then Shia put down Crystal Skull, and well, most of you know that story. So, but for a while, I have to say, I thought that initially, there was this rumor that it was about the Bermuda Triangle. So, which would have been weird, but it fit in, obviously, to what this movie is about, and now we're getting into spoilers. So if you haven't seen this movie, please don't watch this video. But if you have seen it, do watch. So, Bermuda Triangle fits in because, in a way, that's about time travel. Many people believe that's sort of a portal of some kind. So, and anyway. So Indiana Jones, it seemed to me always, was going to feature some aspect of time travel. And Harrison Ford, for many years, had discussed the possibility of exploring Indiana Jones's life in terms of his history. And they do deal with some of that in this movie, for sure. Maybe not nearly as much as I would have loved, but at the same time, this is a different Indiana Jones. So, different in the sense that, let's backtrack a little bit. So the movie starts in World War II, 1944. Indiana Jones is disguised as a Nazi, and he is assisting Toby Jones, who plays a archaeologist named Basil Shaw. And they are on board of this train, this Nazi gold train that has all sorts of antiques in it. And at least I assume it's sort of a Nazi gold train. But anyway, they have antiques. It's the Nazis. It's World War II. So right away from the start of the movie, they have a bag over his head and they pull it back. You see a very young, de-aged Harrison Ford. Young only in the sense of this. We have to remember that roughly, let's say, he was close to about 39 years old, 38 years old when he did Raiders of the Lost Ark. So, yes, a young man, but not nearly as young as many might think for that time. So, anyway, to put that into context, in this 1944 section, we're going to say he's pretty much in his 40s. He's disguised as a Nazi. They obviously know he's not a Nazi. Then he escapes. He goes by motorbike. He's inside this train. And there's this need to retrieve the Longinus spear. I think I'm saying it correctly. This is the Spear of Destiny, which became part of a comic book series a while back from Dark Horse Comics. And so that was kind of exciting to see them mention it. But of course, the Spear of Destiny, which is the spear that supposedly pierced Jesus Christ when he was on the cross, is a fake. And this is determined by Basil Shaw, who overhears Mads Mikkelsen, who plays Jürgen Voller, definitely a Nazi. and he realizes this spear is a fake. But Voller also has in his possession something that Hitler and the whole Nazi party, or at the very least Hitler, would be interested in, and that is the Antikythera mechanism. Antikythera mechanism. Now, I've read a little bit about this. This was not something, and you historians out there can correct me if I'm wrong, was not actually invented by Archimedes, a Greek scholar, mathematician, and inventor from way back. But this movie establishes that he actually invented this device, this mechanism. This mechanism, when combined with, it's a dial combined with graphica, I believe, and when you put them together, you fuse them together, you can actually create a portal through time, or as they say, fissures in time. Indiana Jones is able to retrieve it, or I think Basil Shaw does, one or the other. They both get it. They're leaving, they're running away from the Nazis. And I gotta say, the de-aging I thought was really quite good. I think there were a couple of moments where it looked like a video game. This is how the movie starts. And there's a lot of action and some explosions and gunfire and so on. Indiana Jones has this thing where he'll knock on a window, a car window where a Nazi is, and they'll roll down the window and then he punches them. Or as some of you have seen, he covers Jürgen Voller's face with his hat, pulls it away and then punches him. It was some funny stuff, I have to say. This whole sequence is about 22 minutes. And they, they're in the middle, really, of World War II is what's happening. And at one point, Indiana Jones is almost hung by a rope, and there's all kinds of stuff here that's really pretty exciting, I thought. It was very entertaining. So they escape with the dial, and then we cut to, almost immediately, modern-day 1969, New York City. And you hear a clock ticking, which you hear actually in the opening credits of the movie. There is a Paramount Mountain, but it doesn't fade to anything, sorry to say. It's actually the Lucasfilm logo that fades into a door lock. So actually, that was fine. I still miss the idea of the mountain fading into something that is a mountain of some kind, or in the case of Crystal Skull, a molehill, but whatever. So we're in 1969, it's New York City. Indiana Jones obviously is now 69 years old, and he's living in an apartment. And he's woken up by some hippies who live downstairs from him, who are playing Magical Mystery Tour. If you're a Beatles fan too, at the very least you get the opportunity to hear this song, which is so fantastic. And but the hippies are up at 8 a.m. They're blasting this song, and they're saying, "Hey, it's a day of celebration, Dr. Jones, because it's the moon landing." And of course, that's what the whole thing is. And Indiana Jones is much older, of course, and he pours a little alcohol into his coffee. And that's how he starts his day. He has divorce papers, actually a separation at the very least, from Marion Ravenwood, whom he married at the end of Crystal Skull. And apparently Mutt Williams had died in Vietnam, which he reveals later on. So that was one way to avoid having Shia LaBeouf. And, I gotta say, I'm one of the few defenders, well, maybe not one of the few, but I liked the character of Mutt Williams a lot in Crystal Skull. I thought that Shia LaBeouf is actually a much better actor than people gave him credit for. Everybody just thought of him as the kid from Even Stevens, but he is a pretty good actor. So this is also the last day for Indiana Jones as a teacher. He's retiring. He's teaching at Hunter College, and I've known some people that went to Hunter College back in the day, so it's funny to hear all these references, because I used to live in New York. And the students are not very interested in anything Indiana Jones is teaching. He's even telling them there's a final exam, and, you got to get ready, and nothing. So they just yawn. And then somebody brings in a TV into the room and it says, "Look, it's the moon landing." And all that stuff just showed that Indiana Jones was suddenly something of a relic himself. That what it is that he's teaching about archaeology, it just doesn't resonate. Now, among the students is somebody that I guess is just visiting, and that's Phoebe Waller-Bridge, who plays Helena Shaw. Now we'll get back to her in a minute. But then there's the retirement, little party for Indiana Jones because it's his last day teaching. They give him a clock, which I thought was a nice touch, because this whole movie has to do with time in ways that reminded me a lot of Back to the Future. Because Back to the Future also starts in its opening credits. You hear a clock ticking, and there's the credits, and then you see a bunch of clocks. So it's funny how similar these movies are. All right, so he has a clock. He gives it to a homeless person as he leaves the college. He's being followed by Helena Shaw, and Helena Shaw is actually, of course, also known as Wombat, and she is Basil Shaw's daughter, and Indiana Jones is his godfather. So, but he hadn't seen her since she was very young, and we see another flashback later on in the film. I wasn't clear at what time this was, but I'm going to say somewhere in the 50s, before the events, it seemed to me, of Crystal Skull, when Basil Shaw was still alive, and he was a little bit too obsessed with the, I have to read it again, the Antikythera mechanism. And we see Helen Shaw's almost a 12-year-old or something like that. So that was the last time he had seen her. Why he stays out of her life for so long, I don't know, other than that she lives in London. It might be the reason. So she comes into New York City and she wants to see Indiana Jones, but not because she hadn't seen him in a long time, but because she knows that he's in possession of the other half of the Dial of Destiny. And so that's how the movie gets going. He has the other half of it, which he was supposed to destroy, according to Basil Shaw. He had hoped he would destroy it because he didn't want anybody to time travel. I mean, it was just not, which, it's interesting. The Indiana Jones movies, they deal with artifacts that, in many ways, Indiana Jones is aware of the powers that they have, but he'd rather not meddle with them. And this is one that he decides not to destroy. It's not clear as to why he doesn't destroy it, but of course if he did, we wouldn't have a movie. So that's one reason. Anyhow, Helena Shaw, then both of them are inside this, they're in Hunter College, and there are a bunch of artifacts and all these cases full of them. And the FBI shows up. And this is the character played by Shawnette Renee Wilson. She shows up with two henchmen. One of them is, of course, played by Boyd Holbrook. And they want the two halves together, but Helena Shaw has double-crossed Indy. And so then Indy is being chased. And these guys are murderous. I mean, they kill a couple of people that work at the faculty of the school. I mean, I was a little shocked to see that. I didn't expect that. I mean, he just shoots them. This Boyd Holbrook is very much a trigger-happy henchman, and is also trying to learn German, which I thought was funny in an earlier scene, I believe. So Helena takes off and heads to Morocco, to Tangier, because what she does is she retrieves these illegal artifacts, or obtains them illegally, and tries to sell them in the black market to the highest bidder. And so, although she has an interest in archaeology and all this stuff, she is the kind of person that he used to be, Indiana Jones. So there's a whole ticker tape parade going on, and celebrating the moon landing. And he's on a horse, of course, and then he gets into the subway. And there's a lot here that reminded me of The Fugitive crossed with Firewall. So you have all of these moments that are transpiring, and he has blood on his hands because he checks the faculty members before he takes off in the ticker tape parade. So he's also wanted for murder. So Indiana Jones eventually gets help from Sala, played by John Rhys Davies, and Sala is now a cab driver. Here was his Middle Eastern contact, and Indiana Jones brought Sala and his family to America, and Sala becomes a cab driver. So, all right, and Sala helps him out, and then you have the moment where he drives him to the airport, and says, "Give them hell, Indiana Jones," and the idea of the adventures of the past, that he wishes he could relive them. And Indiana Jones says, "This is not an adventure. This is a matter of priorities here, where I have to find Helena Shaw. And this dial of destiny is not, it's a dangerous mechanism, to say the least." So we get scenes in Morocco, in Tangier. Phoebe Waller-Bridge, we find her character Helena's there. She has a boyfriend there. And there's a whole sequence that takes place on a tuk-tuk, which reminded me a lot of a similar sequence from Octopussy. And then there's this little kid sort of like a short round clone to a certain degree. He's a pickpocket who knows Helena Shaw, and played by Ethan Isidore. And so there's a long chase with the tuk-tuk and all this stuff, and Voller works for NASA, and he's still technically a Nazi. Now, what was interesting about that, though, is that there's an earlier scene in the film where he's on board the train, Voller, and clearly Mads Mikkelsen had been de-aged a little bit as well. It wasn't just Harrison Ford. And so when he is on top of the train cars, it looks like he could have easily been decapitated by something that's, as they're going, I don't know how many miles an hour on board this train. But he survives, so I didn't understand that one. That kind of, I said, oh, so he's dead, but he shows up in the rest of the movie. I knew that, obviously, as I was watching it. So that was a little strange. Okay, so Ethan Isidore plays Teddy, so he's a short round clone, and works with Helena. And so we're not clear as to what this relationship entails, other than they're both pickpockets, to some degree. I mean, she is a thief, and he just pickpockets from whoever. Then we get, the movie continues with the search for the dial, the other half of it, and where is it? Helena Shaw, this is who she is, but she wants to have this prize. She wants it, and she wants to sell it. I don't think she cares too much about what Voller wants to do with it. And so she is pretty much a hark back to Ray Winstone's double-crossing Mac from Crystal Skull. They're both capitalists. She's more snarky, self-sufficient capitalist, and she's up for danger every step of the way. And what's fun is seeing Indy disapproving of her motives, and yet he sees the intelligence of a woman who shares a love of adventure. But she also begins to understand his pain and his own life and his history. And there's a scene on a boat where they meet Antonio Banderas, who plays some sort of a fisherman who can find, I think they retrieve the Graphica, if I'm not mistaken, at the bottom of the sea. Anyway, so and I like seeing Antonio Banderas. It's a brief, very brief part, but he's fun to watch. And there's a moment where Indy on the boat is explaining about what happened to his son Mutt and his relationship with Marion that couldn't last because the marriage sort of dissolves because of the pain of losing their son. And I thought that was all very moving. And Harrison Ford does that so well. He's so much more nuanced now as an actor than he used to be, that you really catch the deep regret and emotion in him. So I thought that was terrific. They look for Archimedes' tomb, and they find it. And then there's a whole series of moments where there are bugs and all sorts of things, the traditional stuff that you would expect to see in an Indiana Jones movie with regards to a cave and everything else. But then they find a wristwatch and inside the tomb, which makes no sense. And it just reminded me of some of the stories I've heard about, particularly on YouTube, about how they've discovered a wristwatch inside of a tomb somewhere in Egypt. And I thought, oh man, this really, what's going on here? And Voller knows how to use that dial, but he goes to the wrong century. and eventually they capture Indiana Jones. He gets shot. Indiana Jones does get to use a gun, but he's mostly shooting Nazis, so I guess that's cool. You know, it's funny that in Crystal Skull, he doesn't really shoot anybody. The only thing he does is fire an RPG, a bazooka, I guess, to the rest of you. But he doesn't cause a whole lot more damage than that. So for the fans, not me included, who needed to see him firing a gun, as he did in the first three movies, he certainly gets ample opportunity here, at the very least towards the end. But Boyd Holbrook's character shoots him on the chest, and this could be a bad situation for Indy. And so eventually they end up on a World War II plane. I believe it was a World War II plane. And they take off, and Voeller's inside with everyone else, and they captured Indiana Jones, and he's kind of pushed around like a rag doll. And the contraption works, and he's able to open that portal. The problem is that they didn't take into account this idea of the continental drift. So, because of also the calendars and everything else and how time has changed, and not everything is where it once was, which reminded me of H.G. Wells' The Time Machine. You know, you never, there is a drift. I mean, you're not going to return to the spot that you think you were at, because time just does funny things. Everything changes over the course of history. And so once they open the portal, Indiana Jones says, I don't think you're going to end up in 1939. And because that's the idea. Voller wants to go back to Nazi Germany and not just correct the mistakes that Hitler made, where he couldn't win World War II. He also wants to kill Hitler. So this guy is really, he's like a James Bond villain, really, ultimately, because his plans are just insane. But then so were Hitler's, you know. So they end up in, during the Battle of Syracuse in 212 BC, I believe. I'm sure somebody will correct me because I didn't write that down. That's okay. And then Indiana Jones sees Archimedes. And as an archaeologist, he's actually experiencing time, which he never would have done himself. But, and clearly had no interest in ever doing that. But because he's there, he's seeing something he's read about and studied, and particularly about Archimedes. A nice touch there is, and Helena, by the way, chases him on a bike, gets on board that plane, and Teddy is on another plane and follows him. So, short round clone to the rescue. So they both go through the portal. And Helena's there to rescue Indiana Jones. So that's part of her redemptive the redemptive factor of her character in a way. Because she sees that the artifacts mean so much, but all those types of powers that they contain maybe are just not meant for human hands. And I think that's what she starts to realize. And so they jump out of the plane, Indy and Helena. Some of you may have seen clips of that. And they have a parachute, so it's not them jumping out without one. And Voller and Boyd Holbrook's character, they crash land during this whole Battle of Syracuse. And I thought all that was very thrilling. I thought it was so terrifically staged, beautifully done. And so Archimedes, what he did, this dial, it's set up in such a way that nobody can, if I understood correctly, the dial doesn't allow one to travel to any period of history they so choose. It somehow, Archimedes has set it up in such a way that if you do travel through time, you go back to his time only. Something like that. I didn't quite catch all the details of that. So it sounds a little contrived, but then, so what? I mean, that's, Indiana Jones always sounds a bit contrived. It's supposed to be, I think. But it doesn't feel, false or fake. I'm still thrilled by the whole thing. Even though, of course, this is going to cause problems because a few of the Nazis are killed, during the Battle of Syracuse. So, can that cause a problem for the future? I mean, I don't know. Um, that could create a paradox, But anyway, so especially seeing a plane, which the soldiers they react to like if they are dragons, which I thought was interesting. So Indiana Jones meets Archimedes, and Helena says we have to get back because that portal is going to close soon enough, within half an hour or whatever it was, and they're going to take Teddy's plane because obviously the other plane is burned to the ground. Voller is dead, so is every other Nazi that was on board that plane. Spears were thrown into it. In fact, one of the spears kills the pilots, the Nazi pilots, which I thought was funny. But Indiana Jones says, I'm staying here. And Helena says, but you're dying. And he says, well, I have nothing to go back to. And this is a moment, this is a real cliffhanging moment, really, for Indiana Jones in a different way. It's an emotional cliffhanger, but it's also a cliffhanger that they have to get back. So she decides to knock him out, and she does. And then cut to back to New York City, 1969. And Helena's there, and Indy has been saved because he was dying. I mean, he wasn't going to survive. And but because they didn't have health insurance in those days during the Battle of Syracuse in BC times. So no, they didn't have technology to fix something like a bullet inside of somebody's chest. Anyway, so he's saved by Helena. I thought it was a nice touch. I didn't feel like Helena was trying to take, his place, which some people have assumed that was going to happen. That was what people thought the ending of this movie was going to be. Not just that Helena was going to, first of all, that Indiana Jones was going to die, and that Helena would replace Indiana Jones and become Indiana Jones, and scenes from previous adventures of the trilogy and so on would show Helena instead of Indiana Jones. That sounds like a Simpsons episode. I've never talked about this before because I always thought it was so ridiculous. I never believed it, and it comes from this guy, Overlord Doomcock, who heard from a source from another source, but hey, take everything he says with a grain of salt. Well, I sure did, because I didn't believe that for a second. And by the way, there were no reshoots of this movie. So I will say that the ending, I would imagine at the writing table, there might have been 6 different proposed endings. As like anything else, maybe 6 different prologues were put into place. Marion Ravenwood, who shows up in a second, and we'll talk about that in a moment, after this whole business of him back in his apartment, was supposed to have a bigger role. Karen Allen revealed that in an interview that Spielberg, had he been attached as director, which he had been, and then decided to drop out, that Marion was going to have a bigger role, which would have been nice. But that's not the movie. The movie is Indiana Jones and Helena. And I thought that you always want to try to do something a little bit different. You don't want to always make this exact same story. And, I know Nazis are back, so this is the 3rd time in an Indiana Jones series where we have Nazis yet again. But, and the idea of bringing them back was a good one. So I'm not, points for at least trying to do something slightly different. But it's still the same old villains. I mean, it's kind of like in Star Trek, where after a while, in some of the early Star Trek movies, I was tired of seeing Klingons. Like, come on, I mean, there's so many different, galactic species around the entire universe, but Klingons are always around for some reason. Not in every Star Trek movie, but you know what I mean. After a while, I got tired of seeing Klingons. But that's a whole separate matter. So she said it was going to be a different movie, but with Marion, or at least her part was going to be a bigger role than what she has in this movie, where she just basically appears in the epilogue. So, but like I said, there probably were different endings being considered, and they went with this one. But that doesn't mean they shot 6 different endings. That was one of the things. There were no reshoots. There might have been some second unit directing, which there always is, where the director is not really present for this, but you have a second unit director who goes out and shoots establishing shots, things of that nature, after a movie has wrapped. They did that with Crystal Skull, for example. 2 scenes, were done where Indy is at an airfield after landing in South America, and there he is standing with Shia LaBeouf. That was shot after they wrapped. And an establishing shot of Indiana Jones's house with a dolly track, which was a huge mansion, which nobody ever talks about from Crystal Skull. I mean, it's huge, you know. And then we're downsizing in this new movie. He's in a little New York City apartment. Helena says, you know, I saved you, and I think she still has the dial. And Marion comes in, and she just bought some groceries, and there's Sala. And then there's Teddy, which was really weird. That Teddy is still... Shouldn't that kid have been dropped off in Morocco and say, okay, good luck to you, kid? I mean, I don't know. That was a little strange to me. So, Marion has a moment with Indy, which I thought was fantastic. It was a way of harking back to Raiders of the Lost Ark by really sealing the deal on their relationship, that it was always going to be a relationship between these two. Whether or not they were going to do away with separation and just stay married is, you know, who knows. But you get the idea that at the very least they've come to a decision that they got to take care of each other. And that's what I loved about it. And I loved how it was just so wonderful to see them dial back, if you like, to a moment in Raiders that many people remember, where they're in the boat, and she says, well, where doesn't it hurt? And he says, here, and she kisses that spot, and here, and then eventually the lips. So in this movie, Marion does it. She says, I hurt here, and he kisses her. And then they kiss. And I thought it was just so beautifully done. It was very emotional. It really got to me. I think because it's also it's played very dramatically and beautifully with the Marion theme by John Williams, which can get to you every time. But those two actors, I mean, you know, I could see an entire movie about just Indy and Marion. It doesn't even have to be an adventure. That's how good these two actors are playing these roles, and particularly when they're together. It's just fantastic. And it was a way of reminding us of Raiders in a more as an emotional coda, in a way. And that's what I loved about it. So yeah, that's basically my review for the movie. Mads Mikkelsen is frequently insidious in his overall demeanor as Voller, rather. And Boyd Holbrook is terrific as a trigger-happy henchman. I mean, sometimes you just don't know when he's going to shoot somebody. They're very dangerous. I love seeing the boisterous Sala, played by John Rhys Davies. I think it was a couple things bothered me about the film. I didn't mind the kid Teddy from Tangier. I would have loved less of him and more of Antonio Banderas, but he's a good, upbeat, smart alecky type kid, so he's not bad in the role, and played by Ethan Isidori. The one character who I didn't quite understand, or I felt like something wasn't quite connecting with me, was Shawnette Renee Wilson as Mason. Now, she is the CIA agent who has a file on Helena and Indiana Jones. And so I thought, well, is she working undercover, or is she aware of Voller's need to update Hitler's final solution, or what is going on? I was a little confused by that. And then she's killed by Voller. And they kill a couple of people in this movie. You know, Crystal Skull has, for all the hate that movie gets, it has a sinister quality, that picture, I think. Because there are two different scenes in that movie where you have two different massacres. One is when they're at Area 51, all the Russians, they kill all the army officials there, soldiers and so on. They're in the area. They kill them all. And then they kill the Ugba tribe towards the climax of that movie. And you don't see them doing it, but you see a litany of corpses. So in this movie, quite a few people are shot. And it happens just like that. It startled me. um, quite a bit. Uh, and then there's a scene I want to talk about before we close this out. Voller, there's a scene earlier on in the picture where he's staying at a hotel, and a black waiter comes in. And it's important to indicate that the waiter's black because when he comes in with his tray of food for Voller and a couple of other people that are staying with him in there, he says, Voller says to him in a very insidious manner, he says, "We didn't win. The Nazis didn't win that war. You know, Hitler lost." And it's the way that he says it that the waiter is sort of a little taken aback by this guy, and it's one of the most startlingly effective scenes in any Indiana Jones movie I've ever seen. It was a moment to stop time, and I like moments like that. So how do I rank it? I think it's a very good movie. I think it's certainly marginally better than Crystal Skull, so that shows that that doesn't mean I hated Crystal Skull. I actually love all five of these films really unequally. I will say, if I have to rank them, here we go. It's Raiders, number one, always will be. Number two, I'm going to give it to Last Crusade. Number three, Temple of Doom. And number four would be this movie, Dial of Destiny, followed by Crystal Skull. That's kind of my ranking. At first, I was going to give the edge to Temple of Doom as number two, but at the end of the day, Last Crusade really developed the character, and maybe for some of you, because of that development, where it led to with these two movies, you might have preferred it. They didn't develop it that way, or they just shut it down after 1989. I don't know. But I was happy to see this movie. It's not long to me. It's 2.5 hours. It doesn't feel it. It's a breezy pace. I just enjoyed it. And so I don't know where these people are coming up with, there's a lull in the exposition somehow, or, no. All of it was uniformly entertaining. It doesn't have the intensity of the first two movies in the series, because Last Crusade wasn't really intense. It's thrilling, but it's the earlier pictures, they had a spooky intensity and a real verve in the action. I will say James Mangold did a fantastic job. I'm curious to see a couple of his other movies. I know James Mangold mostly from Heavy, which I saw in theaters way back when. That was his debut, which is a very good movie. And it's a drama, followed by Copland, which I didn't really care for, and Girl Interrupted, which I didn't really care for that much either. But Walk the Line was terrific. And I liked Identity, which was his horror movie. But here he really proves himself as an action director. I mean, I didn't see Wolverine or Logan, so I can't comment on those. And I didn't see Ford versus Ferrari. I have to see now some of his other movies for sure. But I come from the days when he was just a dramatic director. That was my introduction to James Mangold. So, but he does a fine job here. He doesn't really imitate Spielberg, and I appreciated that. He has his own way of dealing with the action, but it's at a breeze. You just feel like you're along for this incredible ride. Could certain things have been done better? Sure, absolutely. I think some of the characters could have been explored a little bit more, just a little extra scene here or there, mostly with Shauna Renee Wilson's Mason. But overall, this is a terrific movie. I mean, I just had a blast watching it, and let me put it this way. I'm sorry to see this end. I knew eventually it would. I didn't think it was going to end when Last Crusade came out. I always had the impression that there were going to be more adventures in the future, and there were. They seemed to have fulfilled their original contract about doing 5 movies, which then got narrowed down to 3, but then eventually that changed. So, Spielberg has more elegance with regards to action scenes, I think, but overall, James Mangold does a terrific job. The action has spark to it. you're involved. I don't, I don't know how else to really put it. He does a good job, but the dramatic stuff he does an even better job, and that is really where the film stands, head and shoulders above most other action movies you might see nowadays. So go see it, enjoy. That's it. That's all I got to say about Indiana Jones and the Dial of Destiny. It's hard to believe this will be the last Indiana Jones movie, at the very least with Harrison Ford, that I'll ever review. So it's both bittersweet and yet wonderful at the same time. I don't know. It's hard to say. I'm glad I'll definitely get the physical copy of this movie when it comes out for sure. And that's all I got to say about that. Let me your thoughts. Did you like Dial of Destiny? Where do you rank it, if that's important? What do you think of this whole thing about the time travel, Archimedes? Let me your thoughts. Tell me what you think. I don't know what else to say. I guess that's about it for now. Harrison Ford, by the way, I hadn't even mentioned. Harrison Ford is great. This is the best Indiana Jones performance he's given by far. I mean, it's fantastic. He is just so good. He is meant for that role. So, there. And I love Phoebe Waller-Bridge. Check out Fleabag if you haven't seen it. So, lend me your thoughts. Please hit like and subscribe. And that's it. That's all I got to say about that. And this is Jerry Saravia at the Movies, signing off.